Living my bucolic life, every city strife. Horses, chicks, and dogs, they are my neighbors. I cook and some spin, and move the horses into the barn. Then time to move them out again. Red barns, green pastures, beautiful my houses. The view I see each day when I arise. This life pleases me, as it is plain to see. I'm living my bucolic life.
Very excited about this new project. It's going to be this skirt. It's a simplicity pattern here, 93.77. Okay, so there's two different options. One has only one row of buttons down the side here. This one, view A, and the other one has two rows. One is shorter than the other, and this one shows making the yoke in a different color. So what I'm going to be doing is doing the one with 2 rows of buttons, and I'm actually going to be incorporating the extra fabric, not just in the yoke, but in that whole front panel. And it's going to be really neat. So let me show you what I came up with. Okay, so this all started because I was rearranging my fabric stash, you know, getting rid of the stuff that I knew I would never use and things. And I came across this light cotton calico that's like this goldenrod, mottled goldenrod kind of color. And I'm not really a huge fan of it, but I also had an old skirt that a friend of mine had given me years ago. I liked the fabric after I stopped wearing it, and I cut it up to just put in my fabric stash, and that goes with it really, really well. And I was thinking, oh my goodness, how fabulous would this be for a fall skirt? But here's the thing. They're both extremely lightweight cotton, all right? So, and for fall, you want something substantial, especially for a skirt like this. You want it to have, you know, some oomph to it. So, I went back downstairs and I found an old tablecloth. It's cotton and it's been washed over and over and over. Had a hole in the very middle, as they do, but the rest of it was great. So what I'm going to be doing is for the sides and the back, okay, so the back, it's all pleated and everything. The sides and the back is just going to be the goldenrod fabric over the tablecloth cotton fabric for extra weight, okay? And that's going to be a nice weight for it. Now the front panel here is going to be a layer of this fabric, okay, with the tablecloth inside there. So that'll be nice also. This is what I'm going to be doing for the waistband yoke, is actually quilting it with some batting. I had a small piece of cotton batting. I'm actually going to be using polyester batting for this, just because I don't have enough of the cotton actually laying around to do that, but I have plenty of polyester. So I'll be quilting it. See if you can see. It's just enough to give it some depth, just kind of following around, and it goes very quickly over there. And I'll show you how I do that on my treadle machine. But I'm excited about this. So what I did is I kind of drew it out first on the little pattern piece here to get an idea of what I needed. And I have already cut my pieces out just because it was so much of what if, maybe, that I did that off camera. So this whole front panel and the yoke, from the outside you're going to see this, and the sides and the back from the outside you're going to see this. Okay, so we're kind of just going to get started. Now my fabrics are going to have multiple layers put together, but it should, at this point I'm thinking it should be sewn together just the way that the pattern indicates. It's just going to be creating those pieces that's going to be a little bit different. Okay, so I'm going to start with that front panel piece, and this is it. And I have it layered with this on the front, my tablecloth layer on the inside, and this on the back. Okay, and so what I'm going to be doing before I do anything is quilt this, and I'm just going to basically be tracing the larger floral motif throughout the entire front panel. I think that that's going to be nice, hold it all together and everything. And so I'm going to go over to my treadle machine and I'll show you how I do that. Okay, so I am over here on my red eye. This is, hang on a second, this is a 1910 Model 66 red eye treadle. She's fabulous. Okay, and I'm going to be starting this kind of in the middle and working my way out. All right, so I have actually done a little bit here, just working out some new things. I had to change out my needle. I'm using a number 14, plain old number 14 universal needle. And the foot, the quilting foot, is going to go up and down as the bar goes up and down. And the concept is you just kind of move it while the bar is up. And I have found that if you have your fabric so it's up and it's ready to move, it's not hanging down over the edges where you're going to be fighting against gravity and everything, it goes a lot better. So I'm just going to get it started here. Oops, got a little sloppy there. So if you want to get a look, this is what it looks on the right side. It's not very dramatic for the quilting, but it's going to hold it together. On the wrong side, you can kind of see the quilting outline. I was trying not to make it too, obvious in your face that this is a quilted garment. But if you are at all interested in the quilted things and how I do it on my treadle and all that, my very first video that I made on this channel is making a quilted skirt. And I went a lot more into depth on how the different feet work, how to adjust your machine, ways to make it easier for you and everything. So if you're interested in that at all, please go look at that very first video when it's very, very cold and snowy out. So the first thing I am going to be doing here is trimming down my layers so that they're all the same level on the top here. All right, so I have my top trimmed down, and I am not going to mark all the buttonholes right now. I just don't think that's necessary, but I am going to be marking all of the pleats. So I am punching a hole at the very bottom of each of the little pleat lines. Okay, and also I'm going to be making a little mark at the top of those lines. So if I place this here, mark the bottom, put a line at the top, mark those bottoms, put lines up here at the top. Gotta be careful with that one, it's kind of tricky, they cross. And then up here, this one's kind of interesting because they don't really have a clear line. I'm assuming the top of this pleat line is the very top corner here. So that's what I'm going to go with. I'm going to come back with my ruler and draw them in. And again, these cross, so that's kind of fun. And we could even, because you know everything erases, can write that this one goes this way and this one goes this way. Right? I'm going to put several pins across the top here because once I get all of this marked, I'm going to go over to my machine and do a stay stitch row across the top. It's going to anchor all the pieces together and keep it from stretching out of shape. And that row I'll be running at about 1/2 inch in all the way around. Not all the way around, just all the way across the top. I want to show you, I just noticed what they were doing. Okay, so when the pleats are crossing, the point that they cross, if you draw the lines, is at that 5/8 inch seam allowance. So at the stitching line, it'll look like they're just normal, but above the stitching line is where they're going to be crossed. And so that's why at the very center back, it seems like they're crossed. They are. They want these to actually be overlapped, just like these are. Okay, so the next piece I'm dealing with is the facing that's going to go alongside the front panel. And because I'm doing the view that has 2 rows of buttons, I have 2 of them. And again, I cut a piece from my fabric that I'm reusing. And instead of just a regular piece of interfacing, I am going to use one of my waistband ones, which is basically just a fusible pellon. It's just pre-cut in nice strips that are nice and even. And for something like this, saves me some headache. So what I'm going to do is just cut a length of it here, and if I slice this up the middle, it should work pretty well, like that. So when I go to fuse it on, I'm going to make sure that this point here is at right about the 5/8 mark. This is a very lightweight pellon, so if it's slightly off, not the end of the world. Basically, my wide part's centered in between the 2 edges. So these are my 2 facing pieces with my face interfacing fused on. And the first step is they want me to fold the edge of the unnotched side. So, the piece is the same either way. Just pick which side you want to be the one you attach it to and fold the other side. And so this is just to keep it nice and neat on the outside. I assume we are going to be stitching it down, so we're not top stitching it or anything right now, just folding and pressing this over. And then this is the side that I'm going to be actually sewing to my skirt front. Okay, so excuse me, now with my skirt front face up and my facing face down, you can see they're quite dramatic prints here. I'm just lining up the edges all the way down. There's a notch in there somewhere, but it kind of gets lost in the print. And I'm going to be sewing this down at 5/8, or in my case, down this channel in my interfacing. And I'm going to do the same for both sides. Alright, so I've got it sewn, and I have, this is my layer for my facing, and then I have all of this. And previously I had just run a row of stitching just to keep it all together, so it would be acting like a single piece. So it's going to be kind of hard to grade these individually, but I do need to cut some of this bulk out because I have to put buttonholes here, and I don't want that big step down where the buttonholes go. So because of that, I'm just going to pink it, because pinking will really help take that edge off. And I'm going to be doing that about a 1/4 inch in, and I'm just going to leave this one the way it is because it doesn't add a lot of bulk. Okay, so first thing, I pink those the whole way. After I'm done with that, I'm going to open up my facing. I think this is a really fun combination of colors here. And I'm going to do an understitching stitch right along here on the facing side with these seam allowances pressed towards the facing. Okay, so that'll be going down this whole strip here. But first I'm going to pink this. Okay, so here it is pinked, and I have pressed the seam allowance in so you can see my top stitching running right here. And what that's going to do is make it really nice so that when I turn this, the edge is going to just curl in towards the inside. Really pretty. Isn't that nice? I love that. So you can see here, because it's understitched, see how the top layer wants to just naturally curl in and hide itself that way? That's what I'm looking for. So I'm going to press it one more time with it turned in. Trying not to totally steam up my camera. I don't know how to get around that right now. Okay, so with that all pressed down, what I'm going to do is stick a pin at the very top and pin this down, and I need to come back and machine baste these top pieces down just straight across right here up in the seam allowance, and then by hand I'm going to stitch this part down. Okay, so now I am just going to whip stitch this over the fabric, and I'm going to try to make sure that my needle doesn't go all the way through to the top layer so that it's not visible from this side. Okay, I'm just going to do this on both of these front facing pieces. I kind of like the look of this underside. What I am thinking is this pattern, well, hang on, let me get the picture. This pattern, it looks like if this bottom part is not attached, that the buttons stop up here and the bottom part's not attached. So if while you're walking and you kick it, if anything happens to be visible, it's going to be a really pretty underside. So I kind of like that. Anyhow, give me a few minutes. Let me finish whip stitching this, and then we'll move on. Instructions said to stop sewing within 5 inches from the bottom. So that's what I've done. I've left that open. I'm thinking that's for when you go to hem it up so that it's still open and you can hide everything nicely. So got this side all done. Isn't that cool? And then here's the outside, and I need to still do this side. So the next thing I have to do is kind of make those pleats on that front piece and attach them to the yoke that's going to go there. But before I can do that, I have to make my yoke. So the only change I'm really making is instead of interfacing, I'm quilting the front piece. So I'm going to basically quilt this thing together and then use this finished quilted piece as the front one, and then I have another piece that I will use as the back one. You'll see when I get done, but first let me just run over to my machine and get this done really quick. Alright, so this is my front yoke piece. I don't even know if you can see the stitches on there, but it's, well, you might be able to see this way better. See, I pretty much covered it with quilting stitches just so that it would hold it nicely and securely. These are my 2 notches. I thought I had my center one done also, but apparently not. But I need to match this up with this. Now, I am currently dealing with trying to see my marks for my pleats on here, and I'm not having a very good time. So I think that I am just going to kind of wing it. I know about where they are up here and where they are down here, and I'm just going to roughly pin them where I believe they should be, try to place this on it, and see how well it matches. Okay, so I have my pleats pinned very close to where they're supposed to be. I feel comfortable with this. So what I'm going to do now is the bottom edge of this yoke piece has 2 notches. And so I'm going to match those notches up here. Put a clip there. Here's another notch. And there's a notch. I'm going to match that up there. As you can tell, with 3 layers of skirt fabric, 2 layers of yoke fabric plus batting, this is getting a little bit thick, but that's okay. Let me pin in the middle here. Now the edge should be peeking off enough for a seam allowance, so I'm just going to place that right now, hanging off the edge about the 5/8 that I would need. Okay. Okay, so with that pinned, I can see if this dart is going to fit, and it looks like it does. So yay. I'm going to pin that. I'm pinning very close to all the way across because I have so many layers here. Let me go ahead and pin this side. Again, this piece should overhang about 5/8 of an inch. And this is my notch, and this lines up pretty well too. So before I go to sew this on the sewing machine, I am actually going to baste it by hand just because there are so many layers. There's a good chance that if I get over there to my sewing machine, the feed dogs will start moving it, and I could end up with things shifted. Alright, so these are my very large hand-basted threads up here, and then after I hand-basted it, and I could tell it was, you know, secure, then I went over to my machine and I stitched it. And now it's the moment of truth. Let's open it up and see how these pleats are going to hang. Pretty neat. I like that. I'm going to go ahead and pin it onto my dress form and take a peek. Okay, so I wanted to make sure that with all of the quilting and all of the thickness and everything, it would still look nice and smooth. And I like the way that the pleats are hanging. It's a nice box pleat look, and I think that after I press it, it'll even be better. So that's really cool. I think that the yoke is going to be nice and secure. So now I need to go ahead and sew the facing piece to this yoke and get everything tucked in. So before I actually sew the facing on here, I was just coming in and cutting out some of the bulk from underneath some of these pleats because it's very thick. And I'm going to come back and trim this part that has the batting in it with the pinking shears. Again, to take some of the bulk and let that move easier too. So that way, when this is all done, it's going to be a lot less right here. Okay? So now I'm just pinning my facing right sides down on here, matching up my corners. First, get my center all matched up here. Now at the very bottom, I've got this laying down so that my seam allowance here is up, and actually it's trimmed and up. Okay, so I'm actually doing this a little different than the instructions. So what I've done, instead of just sewing up and over, first I've just done the seam that's going straight across the top, and I did that at 5/8. Since I have just this right now, this is so thick and everything, I'm going to go ahead and understitch it because I don't have the sides done yet. I can just press this up and do a row of understitching right here along the edge. And also, I am going to clip so that this edge is going to be more flexible, so that when I turn it this way, it's going to want to open up a little bit. And having those clips in there are going to make it more flexible. So there's going to be two things. I just changed my mind again. I am going to clip these, yes, but I am also going to pink it at the edge and understitch it. Triple header. Just because you can tell it's quite thick. But once it's all sewn together, it's going to compress, so I'm not worried about it. It's just working with it while it's thick. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do a row of understitching right here. Okay, I like that. I think I'm going to be able to get a much softer, prettier edge at the top that way. So now I'm going to go ahead and do the side seams. If this is curved that way, when I sew this, it needs to be attached here. Okay. So when I'm pinning it to sew it, because it's understitched, I'm folding it with the edge curved down the same amount that it will normally want to go because of the understitching, and I'm going to pin it with that amount of curve in, if you can see what I'm talking about. Instead of the seam being popped right up on top, it's more on the inside edge just a bit. And again, down here I am folding this bottom edge up just a bit so it is about the same level as the other side. And I'll do this on both sides and sew down here at 5/8. Okay, let me trim these corners, try to get some of this bulk out of here before I flip it. I like pinking this because it really softens where the edge is. You can't tell where that edge is. Who knows where it is? Okay, let me pop out the corner with my favorite metal chopstick. So because I was able to do all of that trimming and everything, because I did the top before the sides, even though it's a super bulky fabric, I'm actually able to get a pretty nice little corner without a lot of bulk in it. So that's why I did the two-step process. So coming down here, I'm going to fold in this bottom edge. This is the bulky part right here where all the seams come together, but it's still not that bad. I'm going to put a little clip there, and now I'm going to also fold down this bottom, and I'm going to put clips up here too for right now. If I get over to the ironing board and press it, then I'll take them off, but for right now I'm just going to hold them in place with clips because I want this roll to be there so that when I sew the bottom it's positioned right. Okay, so I kind of have these placed so that from the outside you don't see any of the lining, okay, because it rolls in because of the understitching. So now this is why I don't like to fold it up ahead of time, because the understitching changes the position. Lots of things can change the final position for this little fold. So I'm going to pop it under here. And I'm pinning it so that it's going to hide the stitching line there, just barely covering it. And then I'm going to come back and whip stitch it in. You hear that, Mercedes? I'm going to whip stitch in my edge here just to keep it nice and secure and neat. Okay, so this is my front yoke. This is the back. I've whip stitched it down, and up here, can you see those are my under stitches? And it's nice and firm, and I think it's very secure. Now in the instructions, if you're following along, in the instructions what they want you to do is actually do all of this by machine. I mean, instead of whip stitching it down. They want you to do a stitch in the ditch thing and then come back and top stitch around here. I'm not going to do that. I don't think it's necessary for mine because of all the other work that I did. But you know what? Every garment is different and every fabric is different, so you might need to with yours. But I am skipping that step. I'm going to pin this up on my dress form and then get the back pieces, and we're going to get started putting the back together. The back and side pieces are much less involved than the front ones because this is the only one that has all of this type of stuff going on. The other ones are just basically underlined. Okay, so this is one of my back pieces. They were cut so that you sew them together in the center back, and I have a layer of my cotton tablecloth and a layer of my cotton calico here. And so actually before I do anything, I'm going to do 2 rows of stitching. The first one is going to be a regular, like a stay stitch type of stitch, you know, about a 1/2 inch in all the way around, just to secure these 2 pieces together. I'm going to iron this actually before I do that, but just to secure it together. After I have that done, then I'm going to come back and I'm going to serge both of the sides. I don't really need to worry about the top. It's going to be encased in that yoke. I don't really need to worry about the bottom because there's going to be some kind of a hem going on. But for right now, I'm going to straight stitch all the way around so that these 2 layers can be treated as one, and serge the 2 sides. Okay, so I decided not to sew the bottom edges together. I'm just going to let those do their thing so that that way I'm not going to end up with any gaps or something, because it seems like as I'm working with it, the tablecloth wants to rest at different layers and different levels than the calico wants to rest. So I'm just going to let them do that, and if it comes time to hem it and I need to hem it separately, that's fine. I can do that too. Okay, so I have my back pieces, you know, sandwiched together correctly, and right now I have the center backs pinned. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and sew this at a 5/8 seam and press it open. I do have my edges serged, and that is how I'm going to be finishing those edges off, you know. Once I have this pressed open, then we can work on the pleats. Okay, so now that all that is done, I can go ahead and actually mark my back pieces. So I have these 2 dots over here that are for pocket placement. And again, I am marking the bottoms of all of these pleats. And I will be marking the top lines too. Now the way that I worked it on the front, because my pleats on the front were very, very thick. I had a lot of layers of stuff going on there. I just kind of brought them so that they're meeting here and then opened it up a bit and it made them overlap, you know. I'm hoping that this back one is going to be easier for me to make the pleats on because it's not quite as thick. But even so, I think that the pleats on my front worked out okay because it fit in that yoke fine. So I'm going to go ahead with my pen and mark the placement dots down here and across here. This is my heat erasable pen. As you know, it will come off, as it will. Okay, so this pleat line is matching up right here with that center fold line. Let me scoot you in here. All right, so doing it afterwards, it makes sense that this pleat is coming to the middle. So then that one's marked. I'm just coming up here above all these other pleats. I'm gonna put a little triangle for my notch and mark the center there. Instead of marking both of those lines in the center here, sorry, this one here down here, instead of marking both of these cross little lines up here, I just put one in the middle. I know what that means. So I'll do the same marking for the other side, but because I'm able to see this a lot better, I could not see my marks on the other one because it was so busy. I'm going to go ahead and pin it. So I'm just pinching this mark and that one, and bringing it over to the middle and just crossing that center line just a hair. Okay, and then this one, I'm going to pinch these two, bring them over, and let this side cross the center line just a hair. And when I go to put my yoke on, or my back waistband on, if it feels like it's a little too snug, I can just adjust these pleats at that point to make it fit. The center one, I'm pinching these two marks that I made and bringing it to the center seam. Pin that. And now I need to mark the other side, but I'll be doing the pleats over there just the same as this. All right, so just to keep everything nice and straight, I'm going to go ahead and run a row of basting stitches, not the whole way, but across these, just to hold them still so I can remove those pins and get ready for the next step. And basting really does not take very much time. It's and it sure does help secure things a lot better than just pins. So I do recommend that you do this step. So I want to make sure that my darts are going to hang right, but it looks like I'm not going to be able to judge that exactly until I get the waistband on here to know how it's going to lay. I'm thinking that this skirt is actually going to be a little bit lower because my waistband is so wide. So once I have that done, we will see. For right now, I need to work on the side front piece. Hello and good morning. It is the next morning, but I am not going to show my face because I have not yet done my face or my hair, and I just wanted to come up here and start sewing. So here I am. So the first thing I'm going to be working on is my side front. And so because I have my double layers here, I need to pull those and sew them together first. But these pieces are cut kind of odd because it's cut on this strange bias where nothing is on the straight. And another thing is if you flip this piece over, it pretty much matches here too. So just in order to kill any confusion for me, before I flip anything, I'm drawing a line down here which kind of matches up with this facing fold line here, and just making a little CF on the front, which makes center front. And I'm going to do that on both sides. Actually, I already did on this side. And that way I know for sure where everything is. So now I'm free to go ahead and take things apart. And just like the back piece, what I'm going to do is very carefully smooth the two layers together and just do a straight stitch up each side and across the very top up here. I'm going to leave the bottom open so that as it falls and drapes and stretches down, it can work itself out. So I don't think I pointed out that my calico, I did make sure that it was pre-washed and pre-dried, and I use hot water when I wash it and I use high heat when I dry it, just to make sure I get all of the shrink that I can out of it. Sometimes I wash it twice and dry it twice, you know, so I know that the shrink, the bulk of the shrink is gone from my calico. It is 100% cotton. And this, I believe, is 100% cotton also, and it has gone through the wash many, many times. So I know it is stable. I would not do this if I thought that either party was going to shrink anymore. That would just be a disaster, and I've done that before, and it is a disaster. So just pointing that out. And also I am, after this one I finished here, I am serging up both sides, and even if I wasn't placing two together, I would go ahead and serge up the sides at this point, because that way they'll be nice and finished when we go on to the next step. And also, if you're ever layering and things like that, if it's a nice quality fabric or something, then I'm really doing the real underlining. I do baste it and I do all of that kind of stuff. For this, I think it's going to be fine doing it this way, But make sure you do the basically stay stitching up here at the top first before you do either side. And after you do the top, start up here and go down one side, and then start up here and go down the other side. Always work from the top down to the bottom. Okay, so I need to mark these pieces now, and these two dots on the side is for the pocket placement. Again, I am not marking the button and buttonhole placement now. I will later when it's time, because I think I'm going to space mine out basically. These just look like they're way too close together for me to have that many buttons. I think that I might do it like every other one, but I want to wait and see once I have the garment hanging up to see what it looks like. So what I need to do is mark my dots here for my pocket placement. I'm going to put a little line where my notch is, and up here at the top I'm just drawing a line where this fold line starts for the facing, and I'll do the same thing at the bottom, and then I can just go like this and fold it along that line the whole way and press it. Now they don't say anything about finishing this side, but I think that it would look a lot nicer. Right now this is just serged, okay? And remember on the front piece, I went ahead and whip stitched it down. I think it would look a lot nicer if I did that same thing here. So after I turn it and press it along the fold line, I'm going to actually just tuck in the edge and whip stitch straight down here, but try to do it so it's not really visible on this side very much. All right, so I've got it ironed. So this, while I was over at the ironing board, I went ahead and I folded this edge in, you know, about 1/2 inch. That's going to give me plenty of space to still put my buttons in here. I am not putting interfacing in here because I have so many layers of fabric. I think that it's going to be just fine. So I'm going to be actually basting across here, and while I have my needle threaded and everything already for whip stitching this, I'm just going to hand baste it instead of machine basting it. So I'm going to do that and then whip stitch it invisibly all the way down this edge, and I think that that is going to give it a really, really nice edge. So I have it just whip stitched in. It's pretty much invisible here on this side. It's pretty much invisible on this side also, but making sure, just like the other one, that I'm leaving about the bottom 4 inches or so open, so that that way I have room to make all of my changes that I need to for my final hem. Okay, so now it's time to get started with the pockets. First thing, I'm going to cut that notch nice and clearly so I can definitely see it, because I need to serge around each one of these pieces. There's 4 pocket pieces, 2 for each side. So when you see these next time, they will all be serged around, and we'll get started attaching them. Now I am ready to attach a pocket to my sides, and what I'm going to show here, you're going to do the exact same thing on the back. Okay, so make sure you have your 2 dots and your notch transferred over onto your piece, and pick a pocket piece. Wrong side. This one will work. No, it won't. The odds of picking up all the ones, ignore the wet spot. I was ironing it and my iron spit, but it'll be okay. So I'm going to match up my notch, and that should line up the dots also. Looks like when I ironed it, my dots disappeared, but I can put those back on really quick. I don't actually need to right at this moment, because what I'm going to be doing is just sewing along this line at a 3/8 inch seam allowance, smaller than the regular. Okay, so on all of the pieces, both side front pieces, both back pieces, you're going to put them on just like this, matching the notch, and sew it at 3/8. Once it's sewed at 3/8, you're going to open up the pocket out and leave the seam allowances pointing out and press it like that. Okay, so I have my pocket sewed on, all 4 of them, and I have it pressed out with the seam allowance out underneath the pocket area. So what I need to do is come back and understitch it, which is going to be running a row of stitches right about here. So it's on the pocket piece, but over the seam allowance, and it's going to go straight down the entire length. So you can see how my understitching is right over here, and that's going to make it so a nice curve. Okay, the edge is going to be really secure with that understitching. So now this is my back piece I have laid down flat. Let me pull you out, and I'm going to lay my side piece, my little short side piece, on top of it, and just match up all of the points that I can see here, basically the top and bottom of that pocket and this whole side down here, and get it pinned on nice and securely. And thankfully this calico is such a nice, well-behaved woven cotton that the pockets did not get stretched terribly out of shape while I was serging them. If yours do and you're using a finicky fabric, just carefully press and steam them until they're somewhat of the same shape. If they're not exact, you know, do the best you can, because no one is actually going to see the very edges of it. So anyhow, let me finish pinning. Okay, so now I'm going to place my pocket piece back on here and carefully mark where my dots are. Okay, so I want the height of the dot, but if it's set in too far, just bump it out. What you want is your dot to be on the inside of all of this stitching. So I'm going to be stitching down here on the inside of this seam, and then around this way. Up here it should be at 5/8. If you're doing 5/8 and you can still see stitching, bump it in just another 1/8 of an inch or something. You want to make sure you don't see any of these stitches. Okay, from here you can make a turn, come in all the way around, and come up to this point, and come up to your dot. All right, then just, it doesn't hurt to have a double seam because, you know, there's a lot of strain going to be there. From that point, go straight down the entire width, or I'm sorry, the entire length of the rest of your side seam. Okay, so really it's bump all the way here, up, and then back down. Okay, so I have made my stitching, came around just like I said, went up and down, and I've ironed it so all my marks disappeared. Now here's the thing, when you open it up, you're going to want your pocket and everything to be towards the front. So I'm just going to smooth it all that way. Alright, so then when you press it like this, everything's going to be facing this way. Now your pocket itself is going to be exposed. That's okay. That's part of the plan. When this is buttoned, it'll be covered. So leave that sticking out, that's okay. What you need to do though is to press this seam allowance here open. So here's your seam allowance, you know, if this is all pressed to the front, like it should be, this seam allowance needs to get pressed open down here. So what I would do is open it as far as you can, and then the back seam allowance clip almost to the stitching and open that up. And then that part you're going to press open, but this part you leave pressed towards the front. Alright, so now what I need to do is get this is my back yoke, these are my side yokes, and I've already done the quilting on them to get them all prepared, just like I did the front one. So what I'm going to do is just fold these over here, and I am going to use clips because they're a little bit thick right now. Clip them on here and go over to my sewing machine and sew these on with a 5/8 inch seam allowance, and then come back and press them open. And because this is so thick, I am pinking the edges just so I don't have a really hard ridge. And because I'm pinking it, sorry about that, it's up here and down here and up here and down here, so it spreads it out. It makes it so it's practically invisible where that ridge is. Whereas if you felt it on the other side, you can kind of feel it. So it's not a huge deal, but it makes me feel happy. So there you go. So now this is my whole back and sides. Here's my pockets. I just have a little pin up here holding that seam allowance for my pocket forward. I have that on both sides. And got my pleats back here. One of my basting threads came loose, so I have that pin there holding it. So I'm just going to try to match this up very carefully. It should stick out the side here enough for a seam allowance. So looks like I have some ease I'm going to need to work in. Let me go ahead and pin this and I'll show you what it looks like. Silly me, I do not have ease to work in. I was pinning the wrong side. Okay. So if I flip it the right way and match up this seam allowance, then this side fits perfectly. So that's a lot more comforting. All right, now let me finish pinning this all the way across. All right, so I've got it pinned on and everything matched perfectly. So I'm going to go ahead and sew at 5/8 all the way around. All right, so I've got just the bottom here sewed on, and I just did a really quick press underneath to try to get it to lay flat. I think it's going to be really pretty. I like the contrast. So I know that there's a lot of places in here where there's a lot of excess bulk that I'm going to need to trim, but I'm going to hold off doing that until after I've sewn the other piece on. So what I'm going to do now is take the counterpart to these pieces and sew them together, same 5/8, press these seam allowances open just like it, and then I'll bring them over. If I can remember which way it goes, here we go. And then I'll bring it back over here and match it up with the skirt piece. So just like the very front where I did the top of my facing first so that I could understitch it and make sure that everything looks beautiful on that top edge, I'm going to do the same thing here, where instead of doing the sides and all that under pressing, because they want you to be pressing this up right now, skipping that entirely, I'm just going to come across at the very top here, add a 5/8 inch seam allowance, and stitch straight across the top, and then lightly press that up, okay, with the seam allowance pressed up so I can understitch it. Okay, so now that this is sewn on, and I've just basically lifted the facing up, all the seam allowances are still this way, okay? I'm going to be doing a understitching line again, right about here, so it's on the facing side on top of all of these seam allowances, but probably only between an 1/8 and a 1/16 inch in here, okay? Okay, so now I have my understitching on there. You can see it. Very pale, but it's there. And what that is going to do is hold it so that when I fold this top, it's all going to curl in, just like on the front. That's going to give a really nice finish on this side. But before I do all of that, there's a whole lot of trimming and grading and things that I need to do in this yoke. So the first thing I'm going to do is just pink at about a 1/4 inch this whole quilted layer here that's my yoke on this bottom edge, because there's a lot of bulk that I need to take out, but I don't necessarily want to go in and trim out here anymore. And because it's quilted, it's very hard to grade it because they're all sewn together. So I think for this one, pinking it is the best option. I'm going to get a lot of use of the pinking shears this video. And then after I've done that, I'm going to come back in with regular scissors, and where there's extra bulk like here, I'm just going to take a little chunk out of there. And so between the two of them, that's going to lessen it. And also over here on the pleats, and this is just because my fabric, because I have a couple layers here, I'll just make that judgment. Now on the front, I had 3 layers in my front piece, and it was actually just that extra layer made it a lot thicker. With this one, there's only 2. If I wanted to, what I would do is come in here, try to do this without getting my hand in the camera, and just kind of clip some of this out. like that. Okay. And actually I think I'll do that because that does make it a lot nicer. I have a very nice seam here, and I am going to be making a top seam up here, so I think that that's going to hold it securely. So let me go ahead and finish doing this all the way across. Then at the top up here, it's the same kind of thing, but in addition to clipping it with my pinkers on this piece, I also need to come in and make some clips this way so that when it flips and it wants to open out, it has those clips give it the freedom to spread without wanting to bunch up and bind. Okay, so I've got all of that done, and so now if I fold this in carefully, it's not too bulky, even though it's a quilted band in there, and I think it's going to lay nice and flat. So what I need to do now is sew the sides of it. Okay, kind of rolling that towards the side so that the seam where the understitching is going to want to come over towards the back. And just stretching this down like this. Like that. So when I sew it, I'm going to make sure that this side is folded up and this side is also folded up at about the same level. Put another clip here. And I'll be going at about 5/8, but making it fit. It's more important that it fits than it's at exactly 5/8, so that my seam is just on the outside of all of this stuff. Okay, so now that I have my sides sewn, what I'm going to do is come back here and trim out the bulk of this corner up here, and also this part down here, just taking some of that off so that if I flip it, so you can see where my understitching is there. And even though that it's quilted, because it's trimmed out so well and understitched, I have a very nice little corner. So flip this over to the inside. What I need to do is get this bottom part situated. And there is going to be a little bit of bulk in that bottom. You just can't get away from that entirely. But you can trim out enough that it's not a terrible nuisance. Let me just stick this little fringy piece up there with a pin and pin it in. Okay, so there's my bottom piece. And the first thing actually that I'm going to do is fold over this top and clip it into place. And I'm folding it so that it curls over, okay? Because I need this put into its proper place before I can pin the bottom of this yoke / waistband. Now that I have this whole top edge clipped like that, I'm actually going to go over to my ironing board and press this edge just so it's going to want to stay this way. It'll make it a lot easier making sure that I have an accurate position for down here. All right, so I have it pretty much pressed on the top, and I think we're going to be fine. So here's the thing: if you wanted to do this the way I did, and you are using a polyester quilt batting like I did, be careful when you press it, because it's a very fine line between lightly pressing a quilt batting and turning it into a interfacing. And because of the nature of what I made, which basically is asking for interfacing, that's okay if it gets a little compressed and everything like that. If you want to make sure that it always stays lofty and fluffy, use something that's not going to compress and melt, like a 100% cotton. Like this is a cotton batting. And I would have used this, but I didn't have enough to do this whole piece. I think I was playing with it with something else once and I used up the bulk of it, so I need to get more. But for this it's fine, even if when I was pressing up here I could tell I was compressing it and everything. But that's fine for this use, but just be aware, polyester quilt batting does melt and does does flatten. So, all right, so now that I have that done, and I can tell that if I take these clips off, it's going to stay where it's supposed to, then I'm going to carefully fold up and pin at the stitching line so that the fold of my fabric just covers it. All right, so I have this whole inner layer pinned down, and now I'm just going to come back again, just like in the front, with my needle and thread, and just whip stitch it all the way across so that it's not really visible from this side or this side, really, just nice and secure and neat. Now in the instructions, however, they are going to ask you to top stitch the top. Oh wait, no, they do want you to understitch, so we're a step ahead there. But they are going to want you to be top stitching and stitching the ditch and everything for the outside of this. Because I'm doing it this way, I'm not going to be doing the top stitching or the stitch in the ditch. But you know, that's possible. If you want to, go for it. So anyhow, I'm just going to finish this up. Alright, so I wanted to show you kind of what it looks like right now. It's actually kind of neat, I must admit. So basically, it's a two-piece skirt. There's a front, and then there's the back side. And they're going to be connected by buttons all the way up here and here. So it's pretty much the way it is. But here's where my pocket is. You can see everything's tucked inside nicely, and it's laying really smooth. And in the back, I've got these big old box pleats. And the yoke, it's not super wide, you know, but it's wide enough that it gives some really nice shape. And there is my waistband. I'm going to turn her again. So that is her from the side. So again, I need to put a bunch of buttons on here, and I need to work on the hem. Now the hem, it's actually going to be just barely a little bit shorter than this. I like the longer length on this because it is more of a going into fall kind of look. So let me show you how we're going to work this. So I know that earlier I had said that I'm going to be hemming the inside layer and the outside layer separately. But as I get into this, I'm realizing that that is going to actually cause more trouble than it's worth. So, because this inside tablecloth layer is the one that wants to stretch the most, I am spending a little time right now with my hot steam iron, just trying to stretch it out and get it as flat as it wants to, because once it gets to that point, that's the layer, that's the level that I'm going to hem it at. So you can see I've just got done ironing this, and when I turn it this way, I have, you know, a decent amount hanging out that I'll be trimming up level with this. Okay, so let's say I am trying to hold the skirt way up here upright. After I have ironed it, I'm going to just let it rest on my dress form so that it can do what it naturally wants to do and totally cool off and everything. And in about another hour or so, I'll come back and I will make those trims, and then I'll be ready to actually start hemming it. Okay, so while the skirt side back are over there hanging on the dress form thinking about their life goals, I am going to go ahead and hem this front piece. And it's going to be the same general technique. So this is my facing. Remember, we left to the bottom 4 or 5 inches open here. So I'm folding it to the right side. Going to carefully pin her. I'm going to be making a fairly narrow hem, which should work pretty well, seeing as this is a very rounded bottom edge of this skirt. A narrow hem will work well. So I'm just going to be very careful that everything is nice and flat here. Now the hem I'm going to be using is about 3/4 of an inch. I'm going to use a white chalk because that might show up better here. So I'm going to make my ruler at 3/4 of an inch here and draw this line as boldly as I can right across here. And I am going to just do a straight stitch straight across there, and on both sides exactly the same. Alright, so I've got these edges stitched over and cut off the corner and trimmed some of the facing. But actually, before I go ahead and hem it, I need to, because I have so many layers here, I'm just going to run a row of straight stitching just along the edge here, just to hold all 3 layers together, so that way nothing wants to get out of sorts while I deal with the rest of my hem. Okay, so now that I have that seam done right here, I'm going to actually trim off the edge so that none of that white shows up, and I just have a nice little pinked edge all the way across. And then I'm going to come back and I'm going to be using this, what is this? Apricot seam binding from, I think, the early 90s. It does have a stretch to it, and I will be using that. So let me go ahead and finish pinking this edge, and I'll be right back. Okay, so back over here on this edge, and I have not flipped this right side out yet, just because it's going to be easier to sew it this way. What I'm going to be doing is taking my stretch lace, and since I have this row of stitching there, that I did, and it is about 1/4 inch from the edge, I'm going to use that as a guideline, and I'm going to sew my stretch lace with the edge just inside of that row of stitching. That's going to work out really well for me. Okay, so the way I do it is I'm sew inside this channel, just a straight stitch all along this channel, okay? And as I do it, I stretch it, okay? And it's going to want to cinch it in just a little bit. I'm not going to do like the worst, super strong mega stretch, but just enough that it'll bring it in just a little bit. Okay, so I flipped it right side out, and this is what it's going to look like. So I just lay it down here. I've just now flipped it, and you can see that the stretch lace, because it was kind of stretched, obviously, it's going to want to pull it in and give it a nice shape. So now, instead of having to fold it double or having to deal with an awkward edge, I can just iron it nicely. Hopefully it won't steam up my camera too much. And this is going to give me a really nice edge that I can come back and hem. Alright, so now at this point I can either machine stitch or hand stitch it. So on this one, it's a very busy print, and I think that I'm planning on hand stitching the back piece, because it is just a solid, and the stitches might show up more. But you know what, I think I'm going to go ahead and hand stitch this also. It's not very long, it won't take that much time. So when I bring it up close, you can see how nice that's going to look. So again, I will probably be just continuing this. They're pretty much invisible, but I did do little felling stitches down the edge. I'll just pick up doing those the rest of the way down, and then I'll just make probably a very small running stitch just going straight down this channel, just picking up a couple threads at a time, so it won't be really visible over here. Okay, so now that I have my skirt front all hemmed up, I can go ahead and start putting the buttonholes on, because the buttonholes go on this piece. The buttons get sewed onto the other piece. And what I'm going to be using, these are actually very old. I'm not even sure how old they are. I'm guessing probably from the 30s. They're like that early plastic. It's a very early plastic. But they're like little 5-petal swirly flowers with a little shank on it. They're really cool. So what I'm going to be doing is marking out and strategizing my buttonholes. The ones that came marked, I think, are a little bit too close. It just seemed for my eye too close, and I have so much busyness going on here that I'm going to spread it out a little bit more. So, playing with my buttons, what I have, if I divide them up equally, let's see, there's 5, 5, 2, 2, 1, 1. Okay, so I know I need 2 at the top section. Okay, that's a given. And that's going to give me 6 more to spread down here. Now, this comes fairly long on me. My knee's right around here, and I don't mind if there's no buttons at the bottom. In fact, this skirt also has no buttons in the bottom, so that's not a big deal. So using my 6 buttons that I have, I am going to use my little marker, and thank you, I think it was Megan, Megan said, if you open it up all the way and then push it in, it's more accurate. And that makes a whole lot of sense. So what I want is I want one up here. Okay, so I'm going to put a little pen right there so I can tell where it is, which is going to be about 1/2 inch under this seam. Okay, so that's going to hold my first one. Now from there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is going to be my bottom one. Okay. So just looking at it, I think that's pretty good. That's going to give me a nice space in between. What do we have here? That's a space of about 3 3/8 of an inch in between each one, and I think that that's pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and put pins where these are. All right, so I've got these. I am going to need to go ahead and make the marks of where I want these buttons to go. So let me get the pattern piece and show you what I'm planning. Okay, and so the only other thing I want to point out is this pattern does call for a lot of top stitching, and I'm very sorry. I am just not doing top stitching because the fabric I'm using, the multi-layers I'm using, I just don't really find it necessary for the one that I'm doing right now. But if you're doing this with a fabric that can handle the top stitching, right now would be the point where you're going to, they're calling for actually 2 rows of top stitching. But here's the thing with patterns. They give you a very good guideline, but you just need to figure out what is the aesthetic you want, you know? So you might just want 1 row of top stitching. You might want to do a row of some kind of decorative stitching, you know? You do you. And they're calling for that around the yoke too. But again, because of what I've been doing and the fabric I'm doing and everything, to me it was better to understitch it, to, instead of stitching the ditch, to whip stitch it, and instead of top stitching it, to come down and fell stitch it, you know. And the other process that's going to be a little bit different is they have a little string here. It's just a long piece that they have sewn like a long tube and then turned right side out, and it's just tacked on here so you can tie it together. It's purely decorative. It doesn't really have a structural point to it. It's made to look like it might have a structural point to it, but it is decorative. I feel like I have so much going on, I don't want that on top of all of my quilting up here in the front. But it's not that big a deal if you want to do it. You know, they give you the placement, they show you how to reinforce it and everything. But I'm not doing that. I think that's the end of this one. So the pattern piece that I'm going to be looking at is this is the one, it is the skirt front. So if I take my pattern piece and I lay my ruler at the very beginning of the buttonhole marks, I can see that that is 1 1/8 inch away from the side. So if I have a 5/8 inch seam allowance, okay, so if I take that out of 1 1/8, that's going to give me 1/2 inch between the very edge, the finished edge of my fabric, and the beginning of the buttonholes. Okay, so that's what I'm going to mark first, is a line that is 1/2 inch in. Alright, so I know this is going to be hard to see because it's fairly hard for me to see too, but I have a line here and here. This is the one that I drew that's my distance from the edge. This is the point where I had a pen and I put my ruler over here so it is perpendicular to my edge, and I just drew a line out, not to any particular length because I don't need a particular length for my buttonholer. If you do, make it a particular length. And because I did not top stitch this whole thing, but I have multiple layers, I want to make sure that as it's going through my buttonhole machine that it's not going to get skewed. So what I'm doing is I am going back then, let's see here, and just very widely basting around the entire thing. Just like, it's very hard to see, but there's a pink line going up through here. But I have just some basting threads going around it. And those are going to hold all my layers together as I make my buttonhole. So I have been over here playing with different sized cogs and samples, and I think I found what's going to work, which is basically a keyhole 5/8 of an inch button. And the keyhole, that little extra circle at the top, gives it a little bit more width, which is what I need for this really fat shank button to come through. So it worked good on my sample. Let's hope it works good on my fat fabric too. Just to make sure, I'm going to start with a bottom one. I'm going to start with this one way down here and take it off the machine, cut it open, make sure it works before I move on to the rest of them. Okay, so I did the first one and it worked pretty well. So we are going to just go on from here. And I am using my Singer 15 with my buttonholer, and I found that it looks nicer if I go around twice, so that's what I'm going to do here. So that's once. Okay, and that's twice, and I went around till I got to the end of that little circle because that way that's the strongest place. So the little circle part of the keyhole is near the outside because that's where it's going to be pulling the most. So that's what it is. If you want more information about how to use these buttonholers, I have a separate video about that. Please go take a look. I am just going to keep on going and make all of these, and I'll see you back at the table. All right, and so this is my little keyhole buttonhole here. So the first thing I need to do is I change the tip size on my hole puncher to one that's going to fit inside here. And excuse me while I cut this out. Now I have several layers going on here, so it's going to take a couple rounds. Okay, oops, here's my little pin. And you can see now it poked all the way through here. And yes, I did do yellow on the back. I didn't even think about changing my bobbin for some reason, but I think it's all right. Okay, so now this hole, you can see daylight through there. That's punched through. So now I can get my little chisel, and I'm just going to carefully punch the rest of it out all the way up. Okay, so now it's open. Make sure there's no loose threads that are going to get me hung up. And I should be able to push my big fat button through there, and it goes well. So there you go. So with all those buttonholes on, we are getting so close to being done. I need to hem the bottom of my main piece here. But before I actually sew this corner, well, actually sew it like this and flip it, I am going to go ahead and put the seam binding on here first. So just like on the front one, I have a row of stitching done about 1/4 inch in along the edge just to hold these two pieces together. And I've evened up the edge so both the white and the yellow are the same length at this point. So what I'm going to be doing is opening up, because remember we only close this to about 5 inches are still open on the bottom. I'm going to open it up and start my stretch tape or stretch lace or whatever you're using in here in this last little section of the facing, so that when it's closed back over, everything's going to be fine from this point over. Okay, so I learned when I was doing the first one that you don't have to stretch this very much. I think I stretched it actually a little bit too much with the front because it was just on the verge of being too much. So what I'm going to do is just lay it quietly, you know, and just put a little bit of pressure on it as I go, but not try to stretch it as I go. So if you're going to do that also, just a little heads up, you don't need to stretch this very much. So again, just like the first one, I'm going to sew this on with a straight stitch along this side, and I'm going to do it just inside my 1/4 inch line here. And if you don't have one, just place it about 1/4 inch in. Okay, so with my lace sewn on, I am going to do this exactly the same as the front piece. I'm just going to put a pin here to mark where that fold is. Folding it inside out like this, getting my edges lined up nicely. And I'm going to stick a little pin right here. Now, it was 3/4 of an inch that I marked off. So I want to do that here just like I did in the front. So I got my little ruler here at 3/4 of an inch, and I'm going to draw my line. So I'm going to just do a straight stitch right across here. And then once that's done, I can trim the corner and flip it right side out. So I'm going to mark the opposite corner exactly the same and stitch it. Okay, so with it stitched right across there, I haven't ironed it yet, so my red mark is still there, but trust me, it'll come off. So I'm just clipping straight in, giving myself about a little over 1/4 inch there. Then I'm going to come down here at an angle. So it looks like this. So now I can flip it right side out. Look for my chopstick. Okay, and I was able to press it out with a nice sharp corner down here. And press up my bottom hem, and it's going to look like this. And I think that's going to be really nice. Because I overlapped it about 1/4 inch, I should have about 1/2 inch from the edge of my lace to the bottom. That'll make up my 3/4 inches I have in here nicely. And let me just press this around the bottom, pin it up, and I'll show you how that's going to turn out. Okay, so now that I have everything pressed down, it's really nice. So just like the other, I need to finish fell stitching this side down. And also, just like the other, I'm going to be doing some running stitches so that they're invisible on this side, down this little channel right here where that outside stripe is. Just picking little stitches, not going terribly far, so that on this side I got it nice and secure, and on this side there's nothing showing. And you can see it goes fairly quickly. So I was just about to mark my buttonholes and realized there was a few of them I did not cut open yet. And because I didn't feel like changing the tips on my hole punch again, I just wanted to show you there's another way. If you don't have a hole puncher and you're doing a keyhole, just get an awl, a little sharp point on the awl, stick that point straight through, and it's like gradually getting larger, so you can just kind of twist it in there until the hole has been expanded to the amount you need. And there you go, that's big enough. So then you can come back. sorry about that, with your chisel or whatever you're using to cut, and just pop it open. So I'm just laying down my side and back piece here, and I'm going to lay down the corresponding front piece. For right now, what I need is the up and down, the vertical placement of these buttons. I'll work on the exact horizontal placement set next as soon as I get this. So for all of these, I am just going to stick my pin through the little circle of the keyhole and make a little mark. Yes, they are coming through. So I'm just going to peel this back, and now I can see where my marks are, and I'm just going to draw a line straight towards the edge for these marks. Okay. Same over here and same over here. Now what I'm going to need to do is draw their placement this way. So if I make a line at, I'm going to do 1/2 inch because that's what the placement, actually no, I'm going to do 5/8 of an inch. Okay, that would be a better placement. And just draw that line straight down. So the point where this line intersects the other line is going to be where my buttons are going to go. All right, so I'm going to finish this morning. There is not much left to do, so I don't see a problem with it. So I just wanted to show you putting on a button because that's the last step. So first thing I'm going to do is wax my thread. Okay, and then I'm going to cut off a piece of thread about 1 foot long. And then I fold it in half with both of the tails together. Find my needle and put a needle threader through that little hole and put both of those tails through the needle threader and pull them through. Okay. Then what I'm going to do this time is I have my little X's here. I'm just going to go down right next to the center of that X till just the loop sticking out, come back up on another side of it and put my needle through that loop and cinch it in. So now my thread is tied off and I'm using a waxed double strand. So I really only need maybe three swipes through the shank to steady it. So let's do one here. Make sure nothing is twisted. Okay, and then I'm just going to do a couple more. And I'm going all the way through because I have several layers of fabric here to reinforce my buttons. If you weren't using as many layers of fabric as I am, you would definitely need to have some interfacing over here to steady the buttons, but I'm good. I kind of lost track how many swipes that was. I think that might actually be 4. Okay, so then I'm going to end up on this side, and I'm just going to take 2 little stitches underneath all of this stuff that I've just made, going the same direction, and then 1 going the opposite direction just to lock it all in. And clip it off. And that's my button. So I just need to do this about a dozen more times and I can go try it on. Very excited. It is finished. I'm so excited. I'll do the reveal in just a moment, but I wanted to give you a close-up of how it's going to look up here. So I've got these pretty little flower buttons, and down here when you kick it open, what you see on this side is something really pretty. And since this is the over part, I think that that's more important than what's on the inside of this part. Just my opinion. Oops. So I have this quilting that goes all the way around. And when I was whip stitching it in here, because it's fairly thick because of the quilting, on the outside it's flat, okay? On the inside there's a bit of a ridge curling in. Because I was whip stitching it, I was able to make that ridge on the inside where it's not visible rather than on the outside. So that's another benefit of going about that way when you have a very, very thick waistband. But I just wanted to give you some detail. Now, I am going to be doing my reveal with a blouse that I have right now that you've seen before, that I think will go with this. But I am also going to be making, this is a sneak preview, a flannel blouse for it, a flannel shirt. And I'm going to be using a green flannel. Now, no, it is not the exact green that's here, but it matches with the buttons, and I like this green. And I think we have so much color going on, it's going to be okay. And I'm going to be using like this unisex standard shirt pattern. Now, it is a tissue fitting method. We're not even going to go there. Okay, we're just not going to go there. But it's going to be fun, so that'll be upcoming. But let's go see what it looks like. Okay, it's all done and I like it. It's actually really comfortable. This yoke waist, it fits really well. It has enough ease in it that it can kind of sink lower and it's not like really pinching you at your high waist, which is nice, which is really nice. And you know, I made this for that summer transition into fall, but it's comfortable enough I could wear it right now. It is all 100% cotton. It's thick because of my multiple layers and everything, but it is 100% cotton, so I think that it's going to be fine. Now, I did some things a little different, obviously. The main differences in what I did is instead of top stitching, I focused more on understitching things, and instead of stitch in the ditch, I whip stitched, but those are really pretty minor. I stuck with the pattern the rest of the way, except button placement. But button placement, that's like a design issue for me. I don't really see a problem with, you know, adjusting things as long as it's still kind of in character with the original design pattern, you know, Dumbo. So I like it. I am going to be making a flannel shirt to go with it to wear in the fall, but I think that this top kind of will work for the warmer days. I think that it can transition into fall. Right now I just have my sandals on, but in the fall I could wear like my big boots and everything with it, and it'll go really well. So I'm excited about it. I hope you like this skirt. It's no zipper, no elastic, nothing like that. So it's, if you don't mind buttons and buttonholes, I think it'll work for you. So next time, see you later. Bye-bye.
Living my bucolic life, we have big city strife. Horses, chicks, and dogs, they are my neighbors. I cook and sew and spin, and move the horses into the barn. Then time to move them out again. Red barns, green pastures, beautiful white houses. The view I see each day when I arise. This life pleases me, as it is plain to see. I'm living my bucolic life.